All right. Any questions so far? All right. I know we're getting close on time, so stick with me. We're going to talk about Section 804C of the Fair Housing Act. It is illegal to make, print, or publish, or cause to be made, printed, or publish any notice, statement, or advertisement with respect to the sale or rental of a dwelling that indicates any preference, limitation, or discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, handicap, familial status, or national origin, or an intention to make any such preference, limitation, or discrimination. All right, I read that because that's virtually the quote from 804C. You cannot advertise property in a manner that is discriminatory in nature. And discrimination means also a preference for the other. So I can't say, the fact that some people would argue that if it says no blacks is different than saying preferred white, because I'm just saying I want one over the other. Those are both equally stupid and both a violation, okay? So you can't discriminate against one party or the other, or show a preference for one party or the other, because by default that is also a discriminatory against everybody else, all right? It also means, check this out, things that you say about your property in writing, over the phone, or in person. So the fact that you say, hey, we don't want your kind, finger quotes for those of you listening at home, but I didn't print that. That was not on my ad. My ad says, I just told, yeah, you're still on the hook, all right? So it's not only just printing, it's also any kind of verbal communication, written communication, email communication, all of that. Anytime you expressing an illegal preference or a limitation to one of your fellow agents, brokers, employees, sellers, renters, or any other person in connection with the sale or rent of the property is illegal. So anytime you have a conversation with another person, it is also covered under the 804C rule. Not only, I know that the rule basically says it is illegal to print, publish, or cause to be made, printed, or published any notice, all right? They are including any oral comments, okay? However, 803B of the FHA contains what we call the Mrs. Murphy exemption, all right? So obviously a statement like no wheelchairs is illegal. However, using phrases like a great view or a walk-in closet or a walk to the bus stop is acceptable, all right? I want to go back for a second because I maybe glanced over the Mrs. Murphy exemption. The Mrs. Murphy exemption is a generic name for a landlord, Mrs. Murphy, who theoretically is the little old lady that lives and she is renting out one of her units in her less than 4-unit property, could potentially get away with some issues as long as certain things don't happen. All right, she can't, for instance, print any of that. So if she said, I really don't want a Buddhist in here, and as long as she doesn't print no Buddhist, anytime it's a violation to print, all right? Anytime that she would hire an agent to help her do that, this exemption, potential Mrs. Murphy exemption, goes away. And anytime she owns more than 3 units, it goes away. And we talked about those exemptions earlier, all right? So if a little old lady, somebody comes up and says, hey, I want to rent one of your units, and she lives in the building, but there are 4 or less, and she potentially says, you know what, I really don't want to rent to a Buddhist, she may get away with that, okay? Now, remember, the Big Mama Luca is the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which initially brought in what? What? Race, right. At no time is there ever an exemption for race. So she couldn't get away with that with race. But if she said something about religion or something else, the Mrs. Murphy clause or the Mrs. Murphy exemption, which is in the 803 Section B of FHA, which delineates those exemptions that we talked about earlier, she could potentially get away with being discriminatory. All right? Now, remember, anytime they include a word that's where it shows a preference, for example, restricted, exclusive, limited, those imply a certain type of neighborhood that potentially could be a discriminatory word. Stick to things that explain the neighborhood rather than the person you're seeking. You should do fine. Now, I want to read you some different things here, and this is from a magazine called Realty Times, and if you guys don't get this, you can sign up for it online. And there's a couple things here that we want to talk about. For instance, when it comes to race, you can't say white family home. That's obviously wrong. However, the term master bedroom is actually an acceptable term. All right? Why? Anybody have a question about this? Now, I know what you're all thinking. It implies a black and white thing. That is not inherently on its face true. So there is no preference or there is no racial component to the word master. We all think there is, but the FHA has had this court case many times where that somebody has put the master bedroom and it has gotten, I don't even want to say gotten away with it because that would imply it's wrong. Master bedroom is acceptable because it describes the type of bedroom, and on its face there is no racial component. Okay? Religion. You can't say Christian home. Rented Christian home. However, if you use a legal name like next to the Roselawn Catholic home, that is not a violation of religion because it doesn't say anything about the person moving into it. It literally talks about a geography that it would be saying it's next to the AUL building. That's the name of it. You could say, well, I'm not insured. That's insurance discrimination. So, no, that's the actual name of it. All right? So if it was called the Roselawn Catholic Home or the Roselawn Catholic Cathedral, that's fine. You can't say near a Jewish synagogue or as part of a Jewish, because that implies a religion, whereas the other one is actually the name of it. All right? Male preferred, obviously a violation. All right? That's a violation of the 74 Housing and Community Development Act, where it has sex. You cannot distinguish one person or the other. All right? Thank God that doesn't apply to, I guess, your dating habits. Although it is, I guess, now in the marital, you can marry a guy. Mother-in-law's quarter and bachelor pads are both accepted. All right? Once again, mother-in-law, specifically now, mother-in-law does not imply, could be a spouse's parent, and doesn't imply that, but a spouse could be a male or a female. All right? So mother-in-law is an acceptable term, and so is the bachelor pad. Both of those. Here's the one. No wheelchairs. Yeah. I love the ones that they give us as examples that, anybody ought to be able to pick this, which one of these is not like the other. The fact that it have an advertisement that says no wheelchairs. I can't imagine anybody blatantly putting that in there. And I will be honest, we're going to talk about some enforcement here in a little bit. There's very little blatant enforcement going on anymore. Now it's a lot of in the gray area. And what I mean by that is where someone is feeling that it's discriminatory, where the person that did it is not blatant. I mean, if it was this blatant where you saw an ad that said no wheelchair for a white Christian male, certainly we ought to go, first you smack them with a stupid stick. But other than that, there is no, I love how they do this. Advertising describing a conduct is not discriminatory. So for instance, you can put non-smoking. That's describing a conduct. Now you got to get in, you could say no drug use, but you can't, it would be close on that no addicts, because that could be a disability. All right, and we talked about that. It doesn't have to be, especially if they declare. We had a guy when I was in the corporate world that on his application told us that he was an alcoholic and seeking help. And we hired the guy, and then coincidentally down the road, attendance became an issue, and we had a rather hard time and a legal battle getting rid of or firing this guy for attendance, because his attendance was attributed to him being drunk and not coming into work because of a safety issue. And their attorney kept saying, well, you hired him knowing that he had this disability with alcohol. You cannot then turn around and fire him because of this. Eventually, the guy ended up just quit fighting it, and I think went away and did lose his job. But that was an example of where, we hired him in with this quote-unquote disability, and I even hate to say quote-unquote because he saw it as a disability. We knew it when we hired him, and then to turn around and use that was a big problem, all right? But using advertisements that describe the conduct is not a problem. For instance, here's another one, no-brainer. You can't say no children. You can say things like two-bedroom, which I guess in a left-handed manner kind of tells the person that's looking for an apartment that's got 8 kids, oh, I really can't move into this one because there's only 2 bedrooms. Quiet streets are okay. Those, that is a description of the property. Describe the property in the neighborhood, all right? Do not describe any of the people. And if you guys stick with that, I think you're going to see that that's probably a better deal, is describing the property, all right? Any questions about advertising? Man, you guys can Google. There's a whole bunch of stuff on there that people have thought of, right? The biggest one that everybody thinks is when they say next to Roselawn Catholic Church. That's not a violation, all right? That's the name of the building. That is acceptable. You can't say in a Catholic neighborhood. That's a violation, all right? Any questions? All right, hold on.